in a quiet village where nothing seemed to change and gossip often weighed heavier than gratitude. An event unfolded that would shake every pair of eyes that witnessed it. It began with two brothers, Chuma and Django, who were caught in a terrible struggle with the swamp's deadly mire. The villagers froze as if rooted to the earth, their hearts pounding but their feet unwilling to move. Fear held them silent and still. In that moment, when it looked certain that the swamp would swallow the children whole, only one figure broke through the paralysis of the crowd: Nafula, the widow who spent her days on the margins and carried loneliness as her closest companion, threw herself into the treacherous mud. With a strength born not from muscle, but from desperation and courage, she clawed through the swamp, each step sinking her deeper, yet her hands never letting go until she had the boys clutched against her chest. She dragged them out, heavy with mud and breathless from the battle, but alive. Nafula herself fell to her knees on the edge of the swamp, gasping for air and barely held together by sheer willpower. The brothers pressed tightly to her sides, the way frightened chicks vanish beneath their mother's wings when danger hovers above. The village, stunned by what they had just seen, stood frozen. For a long time, no sound dared disturb the air. Then, an elder named Mazi Baraka raised a trembling hand and declared with cracked voice, "The hand of God sustained her." His words seemed to tremble with awe, but behind him, whispers slithered through the crowd like snakes in tall grass. If they were her children, it would have been her duty. Why risk all for someone else's boys? She acted with madness, not courage. Nafula heard none of it. She said nothing. She asked for no praise, no honor, no recognition. Covered in mud, shaking with exertion, she only lifted her teary eyes toward the sky, a silent prayer spilling from her heart. Some in the crowd swallowed down lumps of shame. They knew the truth. They had heard those boys cry from the start, and none of them had stepped forward. Then the children themselves broke the silence. Chuma cried out again and again, "I thought I was going to die. I thought I was going to die." Django, smaller and weaker, whispered only one sentence over and over. "She saved me. She saved me." Those words were arrows. Even the hardest hearts bent beneath their sharpness. For though tongues whispered doubt, shame walked quietly through the crowd. Still, another voice rose. The sharp voice of a woman who always carried venom in her words. "That was not courage," she spat. "It was recklessness. She could have let all three perish together. What sense is there in calling her a hero now?" The bitter remark cut the already thick silence like a blade. No one answered. People only exchanged confused glances, unsure of what to believe. Admiration or disdain. Nafula did not falter. With slow, shaky knees she rose, her arms still locked around the two boys. Step by step she moved, her body sinking with weariness, but her will driving her toward the village. The people parted, still silent. None gave her a hand, none lightened her load. They couldn't decide whether to thank her or accuse her. Yet she walked on, carrying life pulled out of death itself. By the time she reached the village edge, timid claps seeped through the crowd, like guilty hands trying to wash themselves clean. Others murmured, suspicious eyes narrowed. They whispered, "Who does she think she is?" Such displays will not end well. But whether words of envy or admiration, all of them were powerless to erase the image now burned into every villager's mind. Nafula, diving into the mire while every single one of them had stood frozen. That night, whispers spread through Kasanga like wind. In kitchens, around fires, behind closed doors, stories multiplied. Some insisted she had been guided by the ancestors. Others claimed she had gone mad from loneliness. Some hailed her bravery, others blamed her recklessness. Yet one thing united them all. Nobody could erase it from memory. A forgotten widow had done what the village's strongest men dared not do. Without asking, she had written herself into the history of the people. The moon rose. The night fell heavy and hushed, broken only by hungry frogs croaking from the swamp and the dull crackle of firewood. The village returned outwardly to its normal rhythm, but Nafula's life had already changed. Inside her lonely hut, there was no laughter, no voices, no footsteps, only silence. The mud still clung faintly to her skin no matter how hard she scrubbed. Her hands bore scratches from reeds and wounds from hidden thorns. What pained her most was not her body, it was the emptiness. She lay on her rough mat, trying to rest, and every heartbeat carried the memory of Chuma's sobs and Django's small arms locked around her. That memory gave warmth for a moment, but the cold quickly returned, sharpened by the fact that no one had come to thank her. No child ran to her door, no mother arrived offering water, not even a single voice came to say she had done well. Everyone had seen her bravery, and everyone chose silence. Hours crept by, each one heavier than the last. Only near midnight did she hear it. A quiet knock, An old neighbor, Muili, entered with a plate of food, a little maize, a few greens. She set it down with weary kindness. "Goodness, my child," she sighed. "Sometimes doing the greatest good leaves you more alone than before. People forget quickly, but God never forgets." Nafula did not speak. She only took Muili's hand, squeezed it, and wept quietly. That hand was the only warmth, the only recognition she would receive. The food remained untouched, for she did not hunger for maize. Her soul hungered for belonging. Her room's oil flames stretched her shadow along the mud wall, a picture of her life itself. Always alone, always carried by silence. Memories crowded her heart. The husband fever had taken long ago. The children she prayed for but never had. The way villagers had labeled her barren, useless, irrelevant. How cruel, she thought, that even saving lives could not change the way they saw her. And yet the swamp itself seemed to whisper to her that the story was not finished. That heaven had seen what people ignored, and fate was not blind. The night passed, heavy with stillness. Nafula closed her eyes, not to sleep but to murmur faint words. If I had children, they would be here now. But God made me a mother for a moment, even without giving me a child. With that murmur, her tears slid down, weighted as stones, carrying pain and hope together. By dawn, the rooster crowed and small footsteps approached her hut. The sun had not yet risen high, and though a new day was arriving for the village, Nafula's heart still sat in the same emptiness. Yet even as she sat remembering every moment of the swamp and the fearful eyes of Chuma and Django, she felt something stir. Change was coming, for the village could not escape this truth. Nafula, the widow they scorned, had saved the boys. And that act, whether called madness or miracle, would soon alter the destinies of not only the widow, not only the brothers, but the man who was father to them both. The sun had not yet fully risen when small footsteps approached Neafula's house. The Ruers' crow echoed through the village, announcing a new day. But to her the morning felt like all the others, quiet, heavy, marked by emptiness. She had spent the night wide awake, tossing on the hard mat, remembering at every moment the swamp, the fear stamped in tumors in Django's eyes, and their tight embrace when they were finally safe. Nafula was sitting in the doorway, her gaze lost on the horizon when she heard the whisper of children's voices. Two timid figures appeared, walking together, their bare feet dust-covered. It was Chuma and Django. They came slowly, as if each step were a request for permission to come closer. In their small hands, they carried wild flowers picked at random in the surrounding fields. They weren't rare flowers or costly gifts, but they were fresh and full of color, as if they carried a piece of living gratitude. The two stopped at the door. Django, the younger, his face still marked by the previous day's fright, spoke first, almost in a whisper. "Auntie Nafula, we came to bring you this." He held up the flowers as if offering a treasure. Chuma Boulder added, "You are our second mother." Nafula stayed silent for a few seconds. Her heart seemed to stop, and then start again, racing as if it didn't know how to handle those words. Second mother. It was the first time in many years that anyone had called her mother. Even with that unexpected adjective, her eyes welled, and she had to turn her face to hide the emotion. Kneeling before them, she held out her arms and pulled them close. The boy's smell of grass and earth mingled with her own, still marked by the swamp's mud. It was a long, true embrace that seemed to fill old holes inside her. The emptiness of having no children, the pain of loneliness, the wound of abandonment. Everything seemed to find some mending in that simple gesture. She couldn't hold back her tears. She cried but smiled at the same time. "You don't have to give me anything, my sons. I only did what my heart told me. I couldn't listen to you dying out there." But the boys shook their heads. To them, that act hadn't been just courage. It had been airbirth. "If it weren't for you, we wouldn't be here. You're part of our life now," Chuma said. Steady as an adult, Neafula held the flowers carefully. As if holding something sacred, she placed them in a small clay pot with water, the only vase she owned. And suddenly, that simple home, always so empty, seemed more alive. The flowers colored the room. But what truly lit the house was the boys' presence. They stayed there for quite a while. Django played with a chicken scratching in the yard, while Chuma looked around the house, curious about every detail. It was as if they didn't want to leave, as if they sensed that Neafula needed them as much as they needed her. And indeed, that moment sealed an invisible banner thread of fate stitched among the three dot. As they talked, a neighbor passed along the road and looked at the scene. She said nothing, but inside her a mix of surprise and criticism began to ferment. "Don't those boys have a mother? Are they already calling Nafa mother?" Her glance was quick but laden with judgment. What was balm for Nafala would become fuel for gossip to others. Even so, in that moment, nothing else mattered. What counted was the new feeling of being called mother. even by someone else's children. It was as if God in a mysterious way had answered an old request. Not in the expected way, but in one even deeper. The pain of never having borne life now turned into honor, being recognized as a savior, as someone able to give life without needing blood or inheritance. When the sun was high, the boys said their goodbyes. Before leaving, Django looked back and said with a shy smile, "We'll come back tomorrow." It was a simple promise, but it fell on Nafula like music. In that instant, her heart filled with a certainty. She was no longer completely alone, and so the morning ended differently from all the others. The silence remained, but it wasn't the cold silence of solitude. It was the sweet silence of the memory of two small voices calling her mother. And deep down she knew the real gift wasn't in the flowers, but in the words that would echo for the rest of her life. The news of what had happened in the swamp didn't take long to reach every corner of Kiz. The rescue of Chuma and Jano became the talk of the circles, the market benches, and even the kitchens while the fire burned to cook the morning porridge. But as happens everywhere, where admiration exists, envy also sprouts. And that was exactly what began to spread, not recognition for Nafula's sacrifice, but the poison of sharp tongues. The first two saw the seed of malice was now a woman known for her bitter temper, and words always steeped in suspicion, while others said Nafula had done something extraordinary. She let out with a dry laugh, "Extraordinary? Oh, don't be fooled. That woman didn't do it out of kindness. She risked herself just to be seen. She wanted to show she's brave, to make a name in the village. Who's to say she isn't eyeing the boy's father?" The line fell like a live coal on dry straw. Some women laughed nervously, others swallowed in silence, but the suspicion hung in the air. In the days that followed, they repeated the story with invented details. That Nafula had run too quickly. That her eyes was seeking something beyond the children. That the heroic gesture was nothing but a performance to draw attention. With each retelling, the lie took on new contours, as if it were the truth. Nafala heard the talk early on. A neighbor with a divided heart told her in a low voice, "They're saying you did it to win over the boy's father." "I don't believe it, but that's what's going around." The widow listened in silence. She didn't defend herself. She didn't raise her voice. She simply kept sweeping her yard, the broom handle scoring the clay ground as if it could also scratch away the hurts that insist on clinging to the soul. But the words hurt. Every venomous phrase was like a stone hurled at her chest. It wasn't enough to have risked her life, to have faced the treacherous swamp alone. Now she was accused of having done it out of Nafula's heart tightened. She had never sought anything but to save two innocent lives. But the village many times did not forgive those who shone Evan for a single act of courage. The children, unaware of the adult's malice, kept visiting her every day. They brought flowers, laughed in the yard, helped carry firewood. They called her mother without fear, without hesitation. But every time those sweet voices sounded, other voices hidden behind doors or whispered in the market fed the suspicion. "They're getting too attached to that woman. She's stealing their mother's place." Naliaka, the most insistent, would even remark loudly as she passed by Nafula's house, "Careful, those who get close to other people's children end up taking what isn't theirs." They were words that burned like acid, meant to wound. Some neighbors looked at Nafula with compassion, but the fear of becoming the target of the same venomous tongue kept them quiet. Despite everything, Nafula did not let herself be overcome. She went on with her daily tasks as always. Woke early, swept the yard, fetched water from the well, tended the few chickens she had. But inside the silence was heavy. She didn't speak about it, yet she felt the weight of every sideways glance, every muffled whisper behind the mud walls. Sometimes at night, lying on the mat, she asked herself, "Did I do wrong? Is the village right to judge me?" She quickly drove those thoughts away with a prayer, remembering Tumors and Django's embrace, remembering the life she held in her hands when she pulled them from death. That was what she stood on. But the pain of being badmouthed was real. It was like an invisible wound opened not by the swamp, but by cruel words. Time passed, and Thestry, that should have been told as an example of faith and courage, also became a field of gossip and judgment. Nifula didn't answer back. She stayed quiet, sweeping the yard as if sweeping dry leaves. Yet in truth, sweeping away accusations she didn't deserve. Her silence, however, carried more strength than any words. Little by little, some began to notice that those who talked the most were the ones who had done nothing, while the one who had truly taken the risk kept only her silence. Thus the village split. There were those who believed in the purity of Nafula's act, and those who fed the suspicions sown by Nalia. But no matter how hard envy blew, there was something no one could deny. Two children were alive, and every day they reminded the whole village who had truly stepped into the mur and who had stood motionless on the bank. Days passed slowly in Kisanga, and while the dust of gossip still hung over the village, A new presence was drawing near, unexpected by all. Camo, the father of Chuma and Geno, was on his way home. He was a man used to the road itinerant worker who spent long stretches away, hauling goods from village to provide for Hissons. His life was made of comingings and goings, more absence than presence. And though he was respected as a working man, many criticized him behind his back. What good is bringing food if you don't bring your company? During the period when the boys were almost swallowed by the swamp, Kama was far away, sleeping on unfamiliar mats, counting coins in distant markets, unaware that his own home had nearly turned to mourning. When he finally returned, carrying his weary body and a travel-worn bag, he sensed something strange in the air. The looks that were usually indifferent now held a mix of curiosity and heavy silence. No one told him anything at first, but the village had never been good at keeping secrets for long. It was at the well that Kamor first heard the story. A woman, unable to hold back, asked, "So have you thanked the widow Nafula yet? If not for her, your boys wouldn't be alive." He froze, the water rope slipping from his hands. "What are you saying?" he asked, incredulous. And there, in a few words, he heard what had happened. The screams in the swamp, the crowd paralyzed by fear. Niafula's solitary courage, Theriski rescue. Camo's legs trembled, his callous hands clenched into fists, not from anger but from despair. A wave of pain cut through his chest. While he walked the roads in search of a living height, had almost lost what was most precious, his 2 sons. He ran home, called Chuma and Django, and held them as if trying to make up in minutes for years of absence. The boy's surprise told him everything in detail, each chatting his version, every word a blow of reality. She went into the mud, Papa up to her waist. Everyone was afraid, but not her. She's the one who pulled us out. Camo's tears came without shame. Hecreed before his sons, cried before passers-by. He felt small, ashamed, crushed by the truth. Someone else had done what should be a father's instinct to lay down his life for his children. Yet instead of accusation, he found in the boy's eyes a spark of hope. They spoke not with blame but with pride. "She's like our mother, Papa. She saved us." That very afternoon, without changing out of his travel clothes, Khmer went to Nafalula's house. Each step along the path seemed heavier than the last. He had never had the courage to face her up close. He knew she was a widow, knew she lived alone, but he never imagined he'd go there, not out of curiosity, but out of debt. When he arrived, he found her sitting in the yard, sweeping in silence as she did every morning. The scene was simple, yet full of dignity. Camo stopped before her, his voice faltering before it even left his throat. His tearful eyes gave him away. "Nafula," he said, "they told me what happened. They told me it was you who brought my sons back." She lifted her tired eyes and simply nodded. She sought no recognition, no conversation, but he knelt before her, a rare act for a man like him, used to walking with his head held high and chest puffed out. "I wasn't here and you were father and mother at once. If not for you, I'd have come back to a grave, not a home. I don't have enough words, but I owe you forever." His voice broke mid-sentence, and Nafula silently lowered her eyes, not wishing to prolong the scene. To her, there was no heroism, only the impulse to save innocent children. The village watching from a distance held its breath. To see Kometha, proud traveler, on his knees before Nafulula was like witnessing an unexpected reversal of roles. The whispers that had accused her of scheming now lost their force in the face of a father broken by gratitude. Yet deep down, for Nafula, nothing had changed. She was still the same widow with calloused hands and a humble home. The difference was that now the boy's father knew the truth. The village's heavy silence, which had once condemned her, began to give way to a communal reckoning. If even Kowo, absent out of necessity, recognized her courage, who would dare diminish it? And so, with the unexpected arrival of this absent father, fate began to stitch new bonds, turning pain into recognition and loneliness into the promise of change. The next morning seemed ordinary, but there was something different in the air. Caro hadn't slept well. He'd spent the night tossing on the mat, tormented by the memory of the boys, almost swallowed by the swamp and by the image of Nafula covered in mud, carrying Hissons as if they were her own. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Geno and Chuma's faces in despair, and felt guilt like a stone crushing his chest. Saying thank you wasn't enough. Words didn't carry enough weight in the face of what that woman had done. He needed to act. At daybreak, Camo left home and went to the small pen where he kept the few animals he'd managed to gather over the years. Among scrawny goats and chickens, there was a young goat, white-coated and bright-eyed. It was without a doubt one of his greatest riches. It wasn't just an animal. It was a promise of livelihood milk for his sons, a good that could multiply and secure the future. But when he thought of Nephila, he realized there was no gold, no cloth, no coin that could carry more meaning than that goat. He took the animal by its still short horns, tied a simple rope around its neck, and with firm steps walked toward the widow's house. At every corner of the village, curious eyes followed him. Some whispered, "Where is he going with that goat?" Others ventured, "Is he going to sell it at the market?" But when they noticed the direction he was headed, the voices quickly turned into murmurs of astonishment. Nephila was in the yard folding washed clothes when she saw Kamau approaching. Behind him, a small crowd gathered, drawn by curiosity. The scene was unusual. The always reserved man, used to keeping his emotions to himself, now carried a valuable gift in his hands. When he reached her, he stopped, set the goat at his side, and spoke loudly so that everyone could hear. "Nephila, there's no way to repay what you did. My sons breathe today because you didn't hesitate to face death. I had nothing more valuable to offer. So, I bring this young goat. It is little compared to my sons' lives, but it is living like they are. I also bring wood from my own supply so you can repair your house, because courage deserves a sturdy roof." A deep silence fell over the village. They had never seen Katha proud chest-puffed man Bo Toanyuan, and now there he was, lowering his head to a woman many still judged insignificant. It was as if fate had written a lesson in plain sight for everyone. Greatness wasn't in riches, but in recognizing the one who reached out at the right moment. Surprised, Nephila stood, her hands trembling. She looked at the goat, at the wood, at the man kneeling before her. Inside, a battle raged. She didn't want to seem self-interested, didn't want to give the villagers' venomous tongues a reason to say she had risked herself in exchange for a reward. But at the same time, she saw in Camo's gesture something greater than the gift. It was public recognition. Father's pride bending not before death, but before gratitude. Her voice came out low but steady. "Kamau, I didn't save your children in hope of gain. I saved them because I couldn't bear to hear a child die before me. What you bring is generous, but I've already received the greatest gift." Seeing your sons running alive, she paused, looked around and added, "I will accept only the wood because I don't want them to say I did good because of an animal, but know that the worth I feel isn't in what you brought, but in the humble heart with which you came." The watching crowd fell silent. Her refusal was more powerful than any acceptance. In giving up the goat, Nephila showed that her goodness had no price. It was pure, born of faith and compassion, not barter. Even Nelia Carr, the woman who had slandered her so much, swallowed hard. Without daring to utter a word, Kalmo insisted, "At least let the goat stay at your house for a while, so the boys can come take care of it. That way they'll have a reason to come every day." But she only smiled that sad and lovely smile that mingles pain and dignity, and replied, "They already have a reason to come. Their hearts know the way." And before them all, she returned the goat to Kamau, but accepted the wood which was carried into the yard. In that moment, the whole village understood they had witnessed something rare. A proud man recognizing the greatness of a forgotten woman, and a humble woman showing that true wealth isn't measured in possessions, but in the integrity of the heart. The unexpected gift wasn't the goat, nor the wood. The true gift was renewed respect, and that respect would echo for a long time in Kasanga's memory, like a quiet lesson that honor isn't asked, for it's earned with deeds that speak louder than words. The sun was already setting behind the hills, when news of the scene between Nafulula and Karmo spread through the entire village. It was impossible to hide. Everyone was saying that the traveler known for his proud bearing had bent his knees before a forgotten widow. They also said he had offered a Yungoder symbol of wealth and sustenance that Niafula before everyone refused it. To many that was incomprehensible. Who in their right mind would give up such a valuable gift? But to those who saw beyond, that gesture revealed something greater than possessions. It revealed character by refusing the goat. Noila knew she was taking a risk. The same tongues that had already spread poison could twist the scene as pride, as if she thought herself better than others. But in her heart, there was clarity. Accepting, The goat would only feed Nalaka's gossip and the slander of those who lived to speak ill. See, she risked herself for the boys in exchange for air ward, they would say. And once opened, that wound would never close. Thus, by accepting only the wood, Nafula showed that her courage had no price. Wood was not a luxury, but a necessity. Her madden thatch house already had cracks, and any heavy rain could bring it down by receiving that practical gift. She showed she didn't refuse help, but made it clear she hadn't acted out of. The gesture, simple on the surface, carried the weight of a moral verdict. The crowd who witnessed the scene remained silent for a long time. Even the children running about the yard stood still, as if sensing that something important had just happened. The women, usually quick to whisper on traded glances, now unable to sustain their earlier malice. The men, who often measured a person's worth by strength or by possessions, saw in that refusal a different kind of strength, the strength of the heart. Camo stayed on his knees a few moments more, head bowed, feeling shame turn into admiration. When he stood, his voice still trembled. Nafula, your decision teaches me more than any road I've ever walked. I've seen a lot in life, but I've never seen someone refuse a gift in the name of their own honor. Today, I understand why my sons call you mother. His words rolled through the village like a silent thunderclap. There was no arguing with them. Even Naliaka, who stood among the onlookers, averted her gaze and went home, biting her lips in anger. Deep down, she knew her venomous tongue had lost its bite. People were beginning to see the real Nafula, a woman who didn't need wealth to be great. That night, when everyone returned to their homes, there was no other topic. Some told the story, praising Camo, who had finally shown humility. Others praised Naola, who had turned an offer into a proof of dignity. There were those who said, "If it were me, I'd have taken the goat without thinking." And the reply came at once. That's why she is who she is, and you are who you are. Some things can't be bought. Inside her simple house, Nefula lit the oil lamp and looked at the wood planks stacked in the corner. She smiled to herself. She knew the material would be useful, but the real gift was something invisible. The quiet respect now beginning to bloom in hearts once full of judgment. For the first time in a long while, she felt her solitude wasn't an unbearable weight. Dignity had become her companion. Chuma and Jano arrived soon after sunset, their eyes shining with joy. They said they'd heard the whole village talking about the refusal of the goat. Mother Nafula. "You are strong," Chuma said excitedly. Django, hugging her waist, added, "Now no one will speak ill of you. Everyone knows you're different." She stroked their hair and simply answered, "Strength isn't in refusing or accepting, my sons. Strength is not letting your heart be bought." In that instant, Nofalula understood that the refusal was worth more than any acceptance, because by saying no to a valuable gift, she had said yes to herself, to her character, and the worth of her soul. And even if some still muttered, most now saw her with new eyes, not merely as the forgotten widow, but as a courageous woman who knew how to protect not only lives, but also her honor. Since the day Kamau knelt before Napula, something began to change, not only in the heart of the village, but also in the lives of Chuma and Django. Before, they were seen only as mischievous boys, full of energy, always racing through the yards and risking themselves in forbidden adventures. After the near disaster in the swamp and Nefula's act that gave them back their lives, the two seemed to have matured all at once. It wasn't a forced kind of maturity, the kind that weighs you down and saddens you. It was as if they had discovered a new way of looking at the world, more respectful, more mindful, more grateful. The morning after the scene of the refused gift, the boys knocked at Nefula's door carrying a bucket. Chuma, with a shy smile, said, "We came to fetch water for you." Lugging a broom almost bigger than he was, added, "And I'm going to sweep the yard." Nafula looked at the two of them and couldn't contain her emotion. She was used to doing everything alone, hauling heavy buckets in the noonday heat, sweeping the floor with a tired body. Seeing those little ones offer help was like receiving the greatest of treasures. At first, some neighbors laughed. "Look, Kamau's sons have become the widow's servants." But they soon realized it wasn't servitude. It was love. Chuma and Django did it, not out of duty, but out of devotion. With each passing day, they were more present in Nafula's life, helping her with the small things that made all the difference. One swept the yard, while the other filled the water jar. Sometimes they brought firewood to light the fire, or helped pick corn in the small patch of land she tended. And they did everything quietly without complaint, as if that were their natural place. The bond taking shape was plain to see. They were no longer just boys helping a neighbor. They were sons caring for a mother chosen by fate. The villagers began to notice the transformation. Some with irony would say, "She raises them without needing to shout, just by example." But deep down, there was admiration in those words. Nafulula never raised her voice, never punished harshly. Her way was different. A calm look, a steady word, a silent gesture, and the boys understood. There was no need for long speeches because her life was already a lesson. Once, while they were helping pick beans in the yard, Django asked, "Mother N, why didn't you want to keep the young goat my father brought?" She smiled, running a hand over his head, and answered, "Because there are things that have no price. When the heart is pure, it needs no payment. The greatest gift is already here, right before my eyes." The boys looked at each other and smiled. They felt even more bound to her, understanding that true love doesn't need to be bought. No lived. Day by day the bond grew. The village which had once murmured against Nafulula began to fall silent before the strength of that relationship. There was no denying it anymore. The boys had changed. They were no longer the pranksters who defied the swamp and the elders' advice. Now they had discipline, respect, and above all gratitude. Kamo noticed the transformation too. At night he would watch his sons preparing the firewood, helping in the kitchen, and wonder where this new attitude had come from. One day he found the courage to ask my sons, "Why do you help so much now?" Chuma with a serious look answered, "Because we learned from Nafula that life is fragile. If not for her, we wouldn't be here. We want to honor what we received." Django Smaller added, "She teaches us without words. Just by looking at her we learn." Kao fell silent, moved to the core. He recognized that despite all his efforts as a father, there were things only Nafula's presence had managed to teach. It was as if she had given his sons something he couldn't provide, the living experience of a love that gives of itself without expecting anything in return. With time, the two boys came to be seen as examples for other children in the village. The mothers remarked, "Look how Chuma and Django have changed. Before, they only ran around and played tricks. Now they know how to care. They know how to show respect." Their change was like a reflection of the change of carried with her silent yet transformative Dot. And so heart which had once beat alone in the emptiness of solitude, now beat in step with two small hearts that had chosen her as a mother in their hearts. The boy's change was not only proof of gratitude, but also a sign that destiny was stitching together a new family, born not of blood, but of the swamp smud, where they had all nearly lost their lives. Nights in Kasanga were usually peaceful, lulled by the chirping of crickets and the distant thrum of drums echoing from a few homes. But that night in Camo's house, the silence was heavier than usual. The man, used to hauling heavy sacks along the roads and facing the loneliness of long journeys, felt there was something harder to carry, the weight of his own absence. After a simple supper, the boys fell asleep early, tired from a day of work and play at Nufa's side. Kamo sat in the doorway, staring at the starry sky. The memories choked him. He thought of the day he returned to hear from the whole village that his sons had been saved by another's courage. He remembered the moment when the boys without hesitation called her mother in front of him. Those words were like mirrors reflecting an old wound he had always tried to hide. The fear of not being enough as a father. When Nafula came by that night to return a pot she had used, she found Kamo sitting with his head down. He tried to smile, but it never reached his eyes. They stayed silent for a few moments until he, unable to hold back, opened his heart. "Nula, I carry a shame I can no longer hide. I always feared being an absent father, and now I see that fear fulfilled. While I was out on the road seeking a living, I nearly lost the two treasures I have left. And you, who owed me nothing, did what I should have done." The words came out like stones rolling downhill hard and heavy. Kamal lowered his head, eyes brimming. It was rare to see him vulnerable. In the village, he had always been known as a man of work, of strength, of firm speech. But there, before Nafula, he looked like a lost boy, confessing a weakness he had never dared say out loud. Nafula listened in silence as she always did. There was no hurry in her reply, no ready-made words to ease Camo's pain. Only after a few moments did she set the pot aside and sit on the same wooden bench. Her voice came calm yet firm, laden with a wisdom that came not from books, but from life's scars. "Calmo, a child needs presence more than bread. Bread feeds the body, but presence feeds the heart. I know you do what you can to care for them, but understand when absence lasts too long, God puts someone in the path to fill the void." Nafula's words struck Kamo like sure arrows. They weren't accusations, but they weren't easy comforts either. They were truth spoken with the calm of someone who knows pain can teach. He drew a deep breath, his tear-filled eyes now letting the tears flow freely. "I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought working far away was the only way to give them a future. But now I see they almost had no future at all. If you hadn't been there, I would have come back to bury my children." The silence that followed was deep. The night wind blew lightly, as if it wanted to carry off the heavy guilts hanging over him without interrupting the flow of tears. Nafula simply laid a hand on Camo's shoulder. She said nothing more. The gesture was enough. There was no judgment, only humanity. In that moment, Ko realized what he had never admitted to himself. He wasn't just a worker who spent long days away from home. He was a man who was afraid. Afraid he couldn't raise his sons alone. Afraid he couldn't meet all their needs. Afraid of failing as a father, and in trying to flee that fear with ceaseless work. He had only gone farther away. The weight of that revelation made him bow his head almost to the ground. "Nafula, I don't know if I can still change. I've lost so much time. Maybe it's already too late." The widow, however, answered gently, "As long as there is life, it's never too late. Your sons' hearts still beat with love for you. They don't ask for gold or land. They ask for eyes that see them, hands that guide them, ears that hear them. As long as they still run to your arms, you have a chance." Her words were engraved on Camo's heart. That night he didn't sleep. He stayed awake, listening to Tumor's and Gino's calm breathing, reflecting on everything he had heard. The wound was exposed, but for the first time he felt no shame in showing it. He felt that perhaps exposing his weakness was the first step to healing and to becoming the father the boys deserved, and quietly went back to her home, knowing that the conversation had not only eased a man's pain, but had also sealed a new understanding. Sometimes children need more than one heart to grow, and destiny, in its mysterious wisdom, had stitched their lives together so that none of them would be left alone. Sunday dawned clear, the sun gilding the thatched roofs, and a light breeze carrying the scent of earth, still damp from the night's rain. The village market was readying for the bustle. It was the day when everyone gathered not only to buy and sell, but to chat, laugh, comment on others' lives, and above all to be seen. The market was Kissinger's beating heart, where reputations were made and broken. That morning, Chuma and Django pressed Kamau to go to the market together. He agreed, but the boys had a bigger plan in mind. They stopped first at Nafa's house and without ceremony ran into the yard. She was sweeping as always when she heard the hurried steps. Before she could ask, Chuma announced, "Mother Nephila, today you're coming with us to the market." Her eyes widened in surprise. "With you? What for?" "The market is a place for family and I—" Before she could finish, Django cut in, hugging her waist. "You are our family. Don't say you're not because we're the ones who chose." Nephila tried to resist, embarrassed by their boldness. She knew what people might say. She knew how tongues had already wagged about her and the boys, but their eyes, bright and insistent, were impossible to refuse. On the way, the sight drew attention to boys hand in hand with a widowed woman, walking like sons with their mother. Kamau came just behind, making no objection. There was no sign of discomfort on his face. On the contrary, he seemed at last to accept that this bond was real and could not be erased. Curious looks followed them. Whispers rose in the air, but the boys walked on, proud to show the world who Nafula was. At the market, they looked for a wooden bench where families usually sat together to eat, roasted cassava or drink hot tea. Chuma took Nephila's hand and sat her between him and Django. "This is the place for our mother of the mud," he said, loud enough for many to hear. Nafula froze for an instant, startled by the phrase, "Mother of the mud?" she asked, almost offended. But Jano explained with an innocent smile, "It's not an insult. It's an honor. It was from the mud that you pulled us. To us, that name is pride." The words dropped like a stone in the middle of the market. Everyone heard. Some exchanged glances. Others smiled discreetly. A nickname that might have sounded like mockery took on a new meaning. It became a symbol of life, gratitude, and rebirth. There, before everyone, Nofila was christened not by blood, but by destiny. Camo, standing behind the bench, felt his eyes brim. It was as if his sons were stitching with simple words, a bond he himself had lacked the strength to tie. He stepped closer, set his hand on Nafulu's shoulder, and said, "They're right. You've become their mother, not out of obligation, but by choice. And there's no truer choice than the one born of the heart." A murmur rippled through the market. No one could deny the force of the scene. What had once been fodder for gossip was turning into public recognition. Who would dare speak ill of a woman called mother by two children snatched from death? Who would dare laugh when even their father bowed to that truth? Even Naliaka, the sharpest tongue of them all, averted her eyes and went home, unable to sustain her malice before the clarity of that gesture, seated between the boys. Nafala couldn't hold back her tears. She wept in silence, but it was a different kind of weeping, not of pain but of fullness. For years she had carried the emptiness of having no children, the weight of being seen only as the forgotten widow, a woman without inheritance, without a future. Now, before the whole village, she received the greatest title she could desire. Mother, not a mother by blood, but a mother by heart, the mother of the mud, the mother who wrenches from death to give back to life. That Sunday, Kisonga's market wasn't marked by cassava sales, chicken trading, or the price of salt. It was marked by the gesture of two boys who, with innocence and courage, sealed a new family before everyone. And it was marked by the acceptance of a woman who, without asking, received the honor of being remembered forever as a mother. The simple act of sitting on the bench with them transformed destiny. It was no longer just an affection kept behind closed doors. It was public, visible, indisputable, and from that day on, no one dared treat Nafula as insignificant. The woman who had plunged into the mud to save two lives now emerged as a symbol of love, faith, and dignity. Thus, what began as tragedy at the swamp's edge ended as celebration at the market. And in that gesture, a new family was sealed, made not of blood, but of destiny. Time passed and Thestery of Nafula Chuma, Django and Kamo took root as part of Kasanga's living memory. That Sunday market wasn't just an isolated episode, it was a milestone. After that day, no one dared speak of her with contempt. The nickname Mother of the Mud, which could have been born as mockery, became a badge of honor spoken even by the driest, least grateful lips. Children who once looked at her with curiosity now ran to her, calling her by the name that had turned sweet. And each time someone called her mother, Niafula felt the emptiness that had followed her for so many years filled with something greater than blood could offer. It was filled by choice, by gratitude, and by destiny. Kamo found his transformation from a traveling man known more for absences than presence. He became a true father in the ville's eyes, not for bringing riches, not for raising houses or stoking fires, but for publicly recognizing the worth of Theon who had saved his sons. The respect he had lost in silence he regained in the act of bowing before. There was no greater wealth than the humility of a heart that bends to give thanks. And because of that, even the elders began to look at him and knew not as the man who left his children for work, but as one who learned in time that life isn't measured by what you accumulate, but by what you honor. The boys, once merely mischievous and reckless, became examples for other children in the village. From each simple gesture a lesson was born. Carrying water, sweeping the yard, picking flowers to take to nap, people began to say they didn't change because they were beaten, but because they saw an example. That is true education. And so, without meaning to, Nerf transformed not only to children, but the whole community's view of the power of a quiet example that the young goat Kamau had offered, and she refused, stayed with him. But in time, the animal multiplied. It had kids that grew strong, and soon there was a small herd. Many in the village said, "It's a sign." Life returned in abundance what was offered with a sincere heart. Each new kid seemed to carry the reminder that gratitude and recognition always bear fruit. At the center of this transformation stood the woman who had once been invisible was now remembered in every corner of the village. Not for seeking glory, not for asking applause, but because moral justice always finds a way to bloom. Where once there was the silence of loneliness, now there were children's voices calling her mother. Where once there was suspicion and slander, now there was respect. Where once there was only a weary heart, now there was a family forged by destiny. To the village, the lesson was clear, even if no one spoke it out loud. Saving someone is not only pulling a body from death, but stitching invisible bonds that transform lives. And Nafula, without noticing, had become a seamstress of destinies, stitching with courage and love what had once been torn. In the end, the swamp was not remembered only as a place of fear. It became a memory of miracle, a symbol of rebirth. Whenever someone passed by and remembered the boy's cries, they also remembered Nafula's courage and murmured silently. Destiny may be delayed, but it never fails the just. Thus, the woman who stepped into the mire to save two boys came out carrying more than living bodies. She came out carrying the revelation of a new meaning for her own life. She was no longer the forgotten widow, the woman without inheritance, the solitary soul. Now she was a mother, mother of the mud, mother by heart, a mother chosen by destiny. And so Nafula's story echoed through all of Kasanga, like a song without verses yet full of meaning. Life always rewards humble courage, and gratitude is the seed that blossoms even in the driest ground. If this story touched your heart, let us know where you're watching from. Leave a comment below. We'd love to hear from you. Don't forget to like the video, share it with your friends and family, and subscribe to the channel. That really helps us keep bringing you real and emotional stories like this one. Thank you for being part of our